Hello Beer Geeks, now at the risk of sounding like the very poorly made YouTube advert you've probably just watched about making $10,000 in a day at home, over the next couple of minutes I'm going to be teaching you to become a better beer taster, to be able to talk about beer much better, and ultimately to get more out every single beer that you drink. These are my tips for becoming a better beer taster. Now, over the nearly 10 years that the Craft Beer channel has been running, we've had lots and lots of comments about the way that we describe beer. Some of them have been very complimentary, some of them have been downright nasty, but we have spent a long time perfecting the way that we do it. I say perfecting, that's up to you guys whether it's perfect, but we like to talk about beer in a very specific way, and the way that everybody talks about beer is kind of specific to them. But there's some great tips that we can use, some great techniques that we can use, and perhaps just some things that we can get used to doing that can really improve how we speak about beer, and indeed how much we get out of every glass of beer that we pour. And that's what we're going to be going through today, both practical techniques and indeed ways of talking about beer. And lots of stuff that we are going to talk about is actually available in our first book. It's called Beer School. We wrote it back in 2016. It starts with the story of us going to Treehouse for the first time. So it's a little bit dated because Treehouse is a very different brewery now, but it's full of amazing tips all about different hop varieties and indeed diagrams that teach you about how you should be tasting your beer, indeed how to pour your beer and stuff like that. So do pick up this book if you haven't got it already. But enough of the sales pitch, enough of the blurb. Let's get into my 10 tips on becoming a better beer taster, starting with glassware. So the first tip I'm going to give you is about glassware. Now, we haven't really dug into glassware on the Craft Beer channel. It's quite a complicated thing. We want to do our research, and we have been doing our research as we build up to that video. But it's also quite a personal thing. So the first thing I would say is that the best glass is the glass that you really like to drink from, that feels comfortable, the one that you always reach for, and that could be a Batman glass from when you were a kid, or it could be some kind of phallic shaped thing like this, but that's the most important thing. But when it comes to actually appraising and getting the most out of our beer, there are some rules you can follow. Now, every beer culture, every nation around the world will have its specific, I guess, preference for glassware. It might vary by region, but each region will have that. And then each brewery might have their own decisions as well. And that might be based on science, it might be based just on the feel, on the look, it might be based on how strong the beers are and how big the glassware needs to be, all this kind of stuff. So if you're going to appraise a beer, probably try to track down what is culturally conceived as or perceived as the best glass for that. That will hopefully give you the best impression of what that beer should be. But if you can't get hold of that, or if you don't agree with that glass, or you don't like that glass, then you can go for a generic glass. Now, I've got a couple here. Some have specific design features, like so this one, which is mostly it's seen as a craft master, which means it's probably for IPA really. Like, you've got this ridge that helps with the pour. You've got the fact that this ridge means that each time you take a sip, you're throwing the beer over itself and generating head again, which, you know, head is always a good thing in beer, whatever the style. But all of these glasswares, and I've got two more down here. I've got the Craft Beer channel glass, which is sadly sold out, but we are getting some more made, maybe with a tweak in design. And then this is called the Brussels glass, so it's sort of Belgian-inspired stemmed glass. All of these things are specific to certain styles, like lots of Belgian styles are great in this. This is a great glass for hoppy beers, for lagers, for sours, just about everything. That's why I love it. And this one, like I said, is all based on IPA. But they all have a couple of things in common, and basically that is that they are fatter at the bottom than they are at the top. And that is what defines a good glass when it comes to beer. Because what you want is you want your beer sat at the bottom, and you want a thinner bit at the top so that the aroma that's escaping with the bubbles, with you swirling it, is staying in the glass, not just going woo and out the top. So that's what I define as a good glass. Get yourself a glass with a thinner aperture at the top than it has at the bottom. And that is going to help you get the aromas, get the flavours, while still fitting your face in. So, good glassware. My second tip is to serve your beer at the correct temperature, because this is going to help you get the most out of the beer. Now, we have done a video on this. We did a lot of scientific research, and you can watch that. There's links below. There's links coming up. It's a great video. And I'm going to pick the beer that is most difficult to decide what temperature to serve at, which is a Baltic Porter. This is from Moonwake. Baltic Porters are a lager, to which we'd say serve that really cold, maybe serve it at 4 degrees, but it's also malt forward, which means you could serve it warm, maybe 10, maybe 12. So who really knows? I'm serving this beer at 6, so somewhere in the middle. because I think that that's where you're going to get maltiness while also retaining the crispness that should be there in a lager. So you can watch that video and learn what temperature you should be serving your beer at. Cheers, everybody. But the important thing to note is serve it a little bit colder than you might think you should, or if you don't know the temperature, err on the side of caution and make it colder, because that way when it warms you can appraise it at different temperatures, maybe work out what the best temperature actually is. If you start serving it too warm, there's not a lot you can do other than putting your glass in the fridge and then chilling it down, and that's patently nonsense. So yeah, get your temperature right, because the right temperature is going to give you more out of your beer. Tip number 3, if you're going to really appraise this beer, you have to do a very different pour. So I see still like loads of YouTube reviewers filling their glass to the brim, and that's the absolute last thing that you want to do. What you want to do is tilt your glass to about 45 degrees, pour your beer, spilling less than I just did, and you want to put about that much in. So you want to get to where the glass starts to dip back in. You don't want to go any further than that, because that's what's trapping the aromas in here. So if you're going to appraise a beer, on the very first pour, do not fill your glass to the brim, because then when you do this, you've got loads of space, A, to swirl the beer without spilling it, and B, to let those aromas form in this glass in up here. Because now when I stick my face in it, ooh, chocolate, Coca-Cola, red berries. Dang, Moonwake, that's delicious. Right, I'm going to clean up the spill and we'll go on to tip number 4. Tip 3, part B, don't spill beer. You can't get much aroma. Well, you get plenty of aroma when it's on the table, but you're not going to get much flavour. Okay, so tip number 4 is use the right techniques. There are some really easy, really quick, slightly ridiculous ways of tasting beer. It's not as ridiculous as you get, say, in wine and in whiskey and in coffee where they use a bloody spoon, but there is one really simple technique you can use, and that is called the bloodhound. So instead of just sticking your face in it, breathing it in, a much better thing to do is to stick your face in it, having swirled it, of course, and do 3 sharp sniffs exhaling each time. And that's because if you think of a dog on the trail or something, it's not just going the whole time, partly because it run out of breath quite quickly, but also because our noses are best at detecting changes in aroma. So if you exhale each time, you're going to repraise it for new each time. There are lots of other techniques. There's lots more that you can do, like I do when I'm doing when I'm judging competitions. And you can watch the full video that we've done on techniques with Ray Daniels, the founder of the Cicerone program, which is like the sommelier course for beer. Links down below, and maybe a link up here as well. Right, tip number 5 is pretty much read the can. I mean, you probably all do because it's the adult version of reading the cereal box, but you want to know exactly what's in this beer, because then when you do get flavours or you do get aromas, you might be able to point to what's in here. So Moonwake, part of the reason I've picked this beer, other than it being quite a special beer actually, I've just learned, is that they give a really, really good insight into what's in this beer and what it should be. So they mention Munich and Vienna malts, they mention a scattering of dark malts, so roasted malts. They say they use new and classic European hops, including Hallertau and Styrian Wolf. And then they talk about the flavours you might get: fruity hit, hint of spice, rich molasses. So reading these labels can really, really help you pick apart. The only issue is you might have it hinting at something you're going to get. It might kind of corrupt you and you'll only be able to taste what they tell you. So I'd say read it after you've taken your first sip and formed your own opinion. But that follows on to the next thing, which is if you're going to read on the can, you're going to see, oh, I love beers with Citra in, and from Citra I get, pine and resin, but also, mango and grapefruit. How are you going to know that unless you stick your face in these hops? So I can't recommend more, even if you're not a home brewer. Just go to a homebrew store. Hops are pretty cheap in the quantities that they're sold in these homebrew stores, and just buy some. Buy your favourite hops and give them a rub, because you'll learn so much. We tend to boil particularly hops down into just the fruit flavours that they create, but hops are flowers that have these same chemicals as the fruits. That's why they taste of these fruits, but equally they have their own unique chemicals and aromas as well. So get yourself some hops. So I've got here some Harlequin. Learn about the provenance. Harlequin's a British hop, and this is from Townsend Farm, and get your face in them. Give it a sniff. So I mean, what I'm going to get here is going to be very, very different. Let's rub up close, shall we? Oh, yeah. I'm about to get a very different aroma from these than I would in a beer that has Harlequin in, like our Now IPA from our documentary. That smells like the fruit salad sweets that I used to eat as a kid. The sister of the blackjack that was much better than blackjack. So you can do that with hops, you can do that with malts as well in small quantities from homebrew stores, and it's really worth it. Or just at breweries, they often put them out, and sometimes they're a bit old and tired, but you might still learn something from sniffing them. So we need to reattach the fruity flavours that we're getting from beer, particularly from New England IPAs, with the actual ingredients that are going in, so that you can then look at the can and go, oh right, cool, Hallertau. So we're going to be talking fresh grass, we're going to be talking lemon rind, we might be talking some earthy kind of spice, hedgerow kind of things. And you can pick where it's going to land or where it's supposed to land if it's not going to be a very good beer, both from the label and from your own experience of the amazing ingredients that go into beer. Thing I'd say is learn the processes of brewing. I know that sounds really dry, but it is really quick to understand the absolute basics of brewing, and you can slowly pick up other things because there's going to be loads of flavours out there that you think are coming just from the ingredients, but actually they're coming from the processes. The classic example is decoction, which is where you actually boil a portion of the mash. So you've got the grain in the warm water, you take some of it out and you boil it. And that can create really bready, caramelly, biscuity kind of flavours that aren't, they're coming from the malt, but it's coming from the boiling of the malt. It also helps us understand where we're going to get these hoppy flavours from. If you add it during fermentation, you're going to get biotransformation, which creates new flavour compounds. If you add it in the boil, you're going to get bitterness, and you're going to get some more kind of deep, rich, structural kind of flavours. If you add it right at the end, cold, in like a cold crash in the dry hop, you're going to get powdery bitterness potentially, but also incredible aroma out of it. So there's all different ways that you can add the same ingredients to get different things, and they will be talked about on the can as well. So if you want to understand those cans, you need to understand those processes. Happily, most of them are covered in beer school. So you can pick that up and read through that, and there's lots of lovely diagrams done by Brad himself that will teach you these processes in a really simple, hopefully entertaining way. And it is a huge, huge part of understanding the flavours in beer and being able to communicate them to other people. So the first 6 tips have been all about what's going on probably in your head and in your glass. The rest of the tips are basically designed to get out of your own mind, because that's how you expand it. So a great reason that we think that we do flavour notes, aroma notes really well is because there's 2 of us, right? So Brad and I are sparring with each other, we're firing ideas at each other. Most of it ends up on the cutting room floor, but the stuff that we eventually put in is the stuff where we've hashed it out and we've worked out what we think this beer tastes like. And that is probably my biggest tip for becoming a better beer taster. It is talk to other people about the beer. Hear what they're getting, because they might suggest stuff that you didn't really quite pick up on. They might use phrases that you go, oh, that's such a nice way of describing what I'm tasting here. And that is the absolute best way to get better at communicating. You can also do that not just by entering stuff on Untapped or whatever rating software you want to use, but by reading other people's, which is why I really think Untapped should insist on a review being put in there, because it's a great way to share knowledge, to share expressions, to share language, as well as sharing beer. So talk to other people about the beers that you're drinking, and you will definitely expand both your palate and the language that you use to describe it. Another really important way to expand your mind is to try lots of other different flavours. So it might be lots of styles of beer that you don't like, but more importantly, it's going to be trying lots of the flavours that we say are in beer that we haven't tried for a long time. I cannot remember the last time I had passion fruit, and once I stop filming this, I'm going to go get some so that I can remind myself, because I've used it as descriptors in videos quite recently, I think, and I haven't had it just like a spoonful of passion fruit for years, I think. So I need to go back and reevaluate that, and there's so many other flavours that we do. It also means that we'll avoid using the kind of tasting notes that I absolutely hate in beer, and I'm guilty of using them occasionally. Stuff like horse blanket for Brett. Nobody sniffs horse blankets, even the people that have access to horse blankets. I've made it sound like people are queuing for horse blankets, but nobody should be using that descriptor whatsoever. Nobody quite knows what it smells like. You can say farmyard. We've all driven past a farmyard and made a joke, and I'm not going to tell the joke. But those are aromas and flavours that we can connect with, and we should be absolutely using those because we've experienced them recently. So A, only use tasting notes that you actually experience, and B, go out there and experience as many as you can. And I include in that, shockingly, drinking wine, drinking whiskey, because all of these, these are flavours that we find in beer. We find the barrels in breweries. We should be drinking other alcoholic beverages and non-alcoholic beverages to find out what other flavours might be at play in our beers. So if you're a long-time viewer of the Craft Beer channel, you might notice that a huge amount of our tasting notes aren't really tasting notes. They're more badly written poems, particularly on Brad's side. So we love to use nostalgia and memory as a reference point for the flavors and the aromas that we're getting. Aroma specifically is very closely linked to memory due to how close they are in the brain, right? And so many of the flavors and the aromas that we get actually take us to a place as much as they do to another flavor, another fruit, or anything like that. So we always, when we pick up a beer, we'll get the top notes, we'll get those top flavors, but we'll also think about what it really reminds us of. I talked about fruit salad sweets earlier, and probably like everybody of my age who's watching this in the UK was like, I love those sweets. And that's a much more powerful thing than me just saying it smells like a fruit salad, a generic bowl of fruit. So that's a really great way that you could do it, but it can also be, sometimes you smell a West Coast IPA and it smells like you're walking through a forest. Sometimes you smell a Czech Pilsner and it smells like you've just walked into like a French bakery because it smells like croissants. These are the kind of descriptors that help evoke like visceral reactions in other people, but also help you connect these flavors as well. So if it reminds you of a holiday in France and you can then collect it to la boulangerie, then that is really powerful. That's going to stay with you, and that's going to be really useful when trying to describe it to other people who are drinking the beer and indeed have been to France. Now, all of this has been building up to tip number 10, which is to stop using the cliches that are always used in beer. And I say this with a massive caveat, which is that we still use cliches far too much on the Craft Beer channel. They're incredibly hard to avoid, particularly when the camera's rolling, YouTube attention spans are really short. You just want to say the thing that comes into your head and then move on and get talking about other things. But things like juicy, things like crispy, things like bready, things like bitter, things like hoppy, none of these really help people. Of course the IPA is going to be goddamn hoppy. Which hops, which aromas, which flavors? Bitterness, is it powdery? Is it smooth? Is it clawing at you? Or is it smooth and subtle? Is it on the front of your tongue, the back of your tongue? Is it attacking your teeth with sourness? What is it specifically? Sourness, sorry, is another one. I've done it right there. With acidity, with lactic acidity, is it lemon or is it more vinegary? Is it like balsamic vinegar or something like that? We've got to be more precise. When we say juicy, do we mean grapefruit juice, which is bitter and watery and light, or are we talking about mango juice, which is incredibly sweet and thicker? This is how we start to communicate about beer better. We start with that initial thought where we're like, this is juicy, and then we go, wait, which juice? Because orange juice is very different to pomegranate juice, right? And we need to be better at doing that on the channel, and you perhaps at home need to be better at doing that if you're trying to describe these things to people, or trying to make notes for yourself, or trying to just put your finger on that flavor as you're having a quiet drink on your own. So that's it. Those are my 10 tips to becoming a better beer taster. I hope it's been really useful to you. I hope it really helps you develop both your palate and the language that you use. It's taken me 10 years to get to where I am. If you look back at don't look back at our early videos, because we were terrible at talking about beer back then. And it really is a skill that's worth developing, because it means that I enjoy beer. It's why I'm not getting bored of beer, because I'm always finding new things, new ways to discuss it, and indeed new conversations to have with the people that I'm drinking with. All of the videos that I've mentioned are linked to below in the descriptions box. A couple of them also came up during the video, and there's some more coming at the end, because there's so much that you can learn from all of the conversations that we've had with other people and learn from, because pretty much everything that I know about beer I've either been told or I've read about if I haven't discovered it at the bottom of a glass. So yeah, I'd love to hear your tips on becoming a better beer taster, or perhaps your eureka moments where something really clicked, or a flavour that you can now describe super well and other people are like, wow, I never thought about it that way. So please hit us up in the comments. That'll help other people on this journey. Cheers.